Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are really getting into something fundamental, aren't we? We're tackling the real mechanism behind lasting personal change.
Yeah, it's a big one. Something that trips up so many people.
Exactly. I mean, we've all been there, right? You make these big resolutions, you start the journal, maybe you buy the expensive year.
Oh yeah, the gym membership gathering dust.
Totally. And then,
Hmm.
a few weeks, maybe a month later, it just fizzles out. And you end up thinking, ugh, I just don't have the willpower.
Right. But what if willpower isn't really the main event here? Our sources today suggest that focusing just on willpower, well, it kind of misses the deeper picture.
Okay.
The real struggle, it seems, isn't just about pushing harder. It's more like an internal wrestling match against who you already are.
Against your established self.
Exactly. So the mission for this deep dive is to unpack what seems to be the most powerful insight for making change stick. This idea of identity-based habits.
Identity-based habits. Okay, so that shifts things quite a bit. We're not just aiming for an outcome anymore, like, say, losing 10 pounds or maybe quitting a bad habit for a bit.
Right.
The goal becomes fundamentally changing the story you tell yourself about who you are.
That's the heart of it. Because if the goal is just the outcome, what happens when you slip up? When you don't hit the target one day?
Your commitment just evaporates.
Right.
You feel like a failure.
Exactly. But if the goal is the identity, well, then a slip up isn't failure. It's just data. Information on the path to becoming that person.
I like that framing. Data, not failure.
Yeah. And this is the core premise we're seeing. True. Lasting behavior change is identity change. It's the crucial distinction. So the goal isn't just, to read a book.
Right.
The goal is to become a reader.
Okay.
It's not about gritting your teeth through one marathon. It's about becoming a runner.
That makes sense. Without that shift in how you see yourself,
Yeah.
any improvements are just temporary.
They tend to be, yeah.
Yeah.
They're like surface adjustments. Eventually, the gravity of your old identity just pulls you back. You have to start consciously casting votes for the person you want to become.
Casting votes. Okay, I like that metaphor. Using your actions as evidence. That's what we're going to unpack today, right? This isn't about wishful thinking.
Not at all. It's about psychological rewiring.
So we'll dig into what the foundations of identity, why it feels so hard to change, that internal friction.
Definitely. We need to look at what identity actually is, psychologically speaking. Then explore why change causes so much resistance, things like cognitive dissonance.
Right.
And then, crucially, the specific mechanisms, those votes, the behavioral tools, and maybe even social supports you need to actually rewire who you perceive yourself to be.
Okay, let's dive into that first part then.
Yeah.
If lasting change means shifting identity, we need to get a handle on what this identity thing really is. It feels so solid. But what is it psychologically?
Well, it's definitely not some fixed object we carry around. Psychologically, the self is more like a developing, evolving process. It's constantly interpreting the world, reacting to things.
Oh.
And to understand why it feels so stable, why it resists change so much, it helps to look back at some foundational ideas. Think about Freud's early work on the ego, for instance.
Freud. Okay, so how does that relate?
Well, he pointed out that our sense of self isn't just there from day one. It goes through this huge developmental journey. The infant has to gradually learn to separate me from not me.
That sounds pretty abstract for a baby. How does that happen? Is it just thinking?
Oh, it's much more physical and concrete than that. It's rooted in basic experience. The baby learns pretty quickly that some things provide sensation instantly, like, wiggling their own fingers or
Yeah.
feeling something inside. That's the beginning of the ego, the part that feels like, I control this.
Right, the direct feedback loop.
Exactly. But then there are other crucial things, like, say, the mother's breast for feeding. That gets removed sometimes. It's external. It has to be summoned back, maybe by crying.
Ah, okay.
And in that moment of needing something out there, the ego meets an object for the first time, something separate from the self. That confrontation forces the first real separation, recognizing a world outside the self.
So the very first me versus not me comes from learning what I control directly versus what I need to interact with externally. That's the foundation.
That's a key part of the foundation, yeah. And then, building on that, someone like Erik Erikson looked at how society steps in and shapes that developing ego.
Society's role. Okay, how does that work?
Well, Erikson argued that society, any society, kind of needs its members to function together, right? You can't have everyone just doing their own thing completely disconnected.
Makes sense. Chaos otherwise.
Pretty much. So every culture tries to foster what he called a strong ego in most people. And that doesn't mean being stubborn or arrogant. It means having an individual core that's, well, firm but also flexible. Flexible enough to handle contradictions, to integrate your own quirks with what society expects, and crucially, to come out of that process with a coherent sense of identity and a sense of integrity.
So identity, in that view, is like the system we use to balance our inner world with the outer social world.
You could put it that way, yeah. It's how we make sense of ourselves within our context.
And when that system works well, it creates stability. We become predictable, reliable.
Yeah.
But that same stability makes change really hard, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We hear about personality traits being stable for decades.
Absolutely. Things like our basic emotional style, whether we tend towards positive or negative feelings, that can be remarkably consistent throughout adult life. It's like trying to reroute a river that's been flowing the same way for 50 years.
Yeah, it feels right.
And this stability is deeply tied to something uniquely human. Our ability to conceptualize ourselves. Our sources connect this to the frontal lobes, the part of the brain involved in planning and self-awareness.
Self-conceptualization. Like the story we tell ourselves about ourselves.
Exactly. It's the metaphor of the self. It's our ability to take our gut feelings about who we are and combine that with what we observe about others, and then create a story, a narrative using language. I am this kind of person. I am good at X. I struggle with Y.
Like, I am a smoker, or I'm just not an organized person.
Precisely. And once you form that narrative, that concept acts like a psychological center of gravity. Any action or thought that deviates too far from that narrative feels wrong. It causes discomfort because it challenges the theory you hold about yourself.
So if I deep down believe I'm disorganized, even if I manage to clean my whole house, part of me feels like it's fake. Like I'm just pretending, and the real me is still disorganized.
That's a perfect example of the phenomenon. The action contradicts the internal metaphor, so the action feels temporary or inauthentic.
Wow.
And that brings us right back to how we actually make change happen. If our identity is this well-established, internally narrated, stable thing, well, you can't just change it with one grand gesture. It won't stick.
Because the old story is too strong.
Right. You have to challenge it with relentless, small, cumulative bits of evidence. And that's where the votes idea comes in.
Okay.
Every single action you take that aligns with the new identity you want, that's a vote. It's evidence you're presenting to yourself.
So wanting to be a reader,
Yeah.
reading just one page is a vote.
It is. It's a small vote, but it's a vote. Wanting to be someone dependable, showing up for a meeting 1 minute early instead of 1 minute late, that's a vote.
It's the accumulation that matters then, not any single heroic effort or single failure.
Exactly. One missed workout doesn't suddenly make you not a runner if you've cast hundreds or thousands of votes for runner through consistent action over time. The current identity is that existing cluster of beliefs and behaviors.
And it's, as you said, well defended.
Very well defended. And understanding how it defends itself is the key to making the new identity stick around.
Okay, this is where it gets really fascinating and maybe a bit frustrating for anyone trying to change. We know we need to cast these small votes. But why is it often so psychologically hard? Why does it feel like pulling teeth sometimes? Why does the old identity fight back so fiercely?
Yeah, it often feels like self-sabotage, doesn't it? The primary engine driving that resistance, the main psychological force, is something called cognitive dissonance. Leon Festinger described this back in the 50s.
Cognitive dissonance. I've heard the term, but what's the core idea?
The core idea is actually pretty simple. We humans have this incredibly strong drive for internal consistency. We want our beliefs, our opinions, and our actions to all line up neatly.
Okay, makes sense.
When they don't line up, when you do something that contradicts what you believe about yourself, it creates this uncomfortable feeling, this internal static. That's dissonance. And we are highly motivated, often unconsciously, to get rid of that discomfort.
So let's take an example. If my identity includes I'm someone who unwinds with a glass of wine after work.
Right.
And then one day I decide, no, I'm going to go for a walk instead. That action, walking, contradicts the belief, I unwind with wine. That creates dissonance.
Exactly. And it can feel genuinely uncomfortable, almost like a mental itch you have to scratch. The brain wants to resolve the conflict.
And how does it usually resolve it?
Well, the path of least resistance is often not sticking with the new, difficult behavior. The dissonance gets stronger the bigger the gap is between your action and your self-image. So it's often psychologically easier to just revert to the old behavior.
Go back to the wine.
Go back to the wine. Or to rationalize. You might change your opinion to match the old behavior. You might tell yourself, oh, walking is nice, but wine really helps me relax. Or I deserve this drink today. You reduce the dissonance by justifying the old identity.
So you're basically finding ways to make the old story consistent again.
Precisely. And we actively seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs or choices, especially when dissonance is high. Festinger's classic example was new car buyers.
Oh, yeah. What do they do?
After spending a lot of money, they'd experience dissonance. Did I make the right choice? Was that too expensive? To reduce that discomfort, they would specifically look for and read advertisements for the car they just bought.
Not for other cars.
Nope. They weren't comparing anymore. They were seeking confirmation. They needed evidence, what Festinger called consonant cognitive elements, to reassure themselves they were the kind of smart person who makes good decisions.
Wow. Okay, so connecting that back to identity change. If my ingrained identity is, say, procrastinator,
Mm-hmm.
the very act of starting a challenging task early creates dissonance. My brain, wanting consistency, might almost prefer me to fail or give up.
Because failure confirms the identity.
Exactly. That lets the brain say, see, told you so, you are a procrastinator.
Yeah.
The easiest way to resolve the dissonance is to make reality fit the existing belief.
That is the insidious nature of it. It keeps you stuck. And this internal conflict isn't just momentary discomfort. It can harden into a really limiting structure over time. Ernest Becker talked about this vividly with his idea of the prison of character.
The prison of character, that sounds bleak.
It's a powerful metaphor. Becker argued that the very strategies we develop to protect our self-esteem, our ego defenses, the narratives we build, eventually they become like armor. And that armor, while protective, ends up trapping us.
So the thing that helped you cope initially actually prevents you from growing later on.
That's the paradox. The defenses that maybe helped you feel confident or safe when you were younger, perhaps avoiding vulnerability or always needing to be right or sticking rigidly to routines, they become this lifelong cage. And then, Becker says, people can fall into the temptation of prison heroism.
Prison heroism, what's that?
It's finding comfort and even a sense of superiority within your self-imposed limits. It's sticking to the safe, known routines, even if they're painful or unfulfilling. It's the smugness of the insiders, as he put it, people who feel they know how things work within their little prison. And the idea of breaking out into the uncertainty of a new way of being is just terrifying.
Can you give an example of what that looks like day to day?
Sure. Think about someone who consistently turns down promotions or avoids bigger responsibilities because deep down they fear they can't handle it. That's the prison. The heroism is when they then boast about how much less stress they have, how much smarter they are for staying in their simpler role. They're taking pride in the limitation.
Or the writer who never quite finishes the book because the identity of potential genius feels safer than being a published author who might get criticized.
Exactly. The prison is the fear of judgment. The heroism is clinging to the aspiring identity. It's defending the limited self.
And this ties directly into self-criticism, doesn't it? That voice in our head that often seems to keep us in line.
Oh, absolutely. Martin Seligman pointed out something really interesting. Those harsh things we often yell at ourselves internally when things go wrong, they're frequently just bad habits. Learned responses maybe from parents or teachers long ago.
But we treat them like gospel truth.
We treat them like royalty because they seem to come from us, from our own minds, which we see as a highly credible source. But often, Seligman argued, they're just baseless, outdated criticisms running on autopilot.
Wow.
And Kristen Neff's work on self-compassion really highlights this too, especially with trauma. She found that many survivors internalize the harsh criticism they receive from caregivers almost as a way to feel safer or gain some sense of control in a chaotic situation during childhood.
A twisted kind of protection.
Exactly. But then as adults, that same inner critic becomes the warden of Becker's prison of character. It actively attacks them, undermines their confidence, and prevents them from seeking the support they need to actually change and build that new identity.
It's really striking how the brain seems to prioritize consistency, that feeling of knowing who you are, even if that known identity is painful or limiting. It prefers the known misery to the unknown possibility.
It's a powerful bias towards the status quo.
Yeah.
And understanding that bias, that friction, is step one. Step two is figuring out how to engineer our way around it.
Okay, so we established this fierce internal battle. The old identity uses cognitive dissonance, maybe even recruits self-criticism to fight back against change. So just white-knuckling it with willpower isn't going to cut it long-term.
Right.
We need what smarter strategies, engineering steps.
Exactly. We need to move from relying purely on motivation, which ebbs and flows, to relying on mechanics. We need concrete, small actions, those votes, but designed in a way that sidesteps or overcomes the internal friction.
And how do we do that? What are the mechanics?
The key principle here, coming through in the research, is behavioral specificity. If the action is going to serve as undeniable evidence for the new identity, it needs to be crystal clear. And the very first law, as James Clear puts it in Atomic Habits, although we're drawing broadly, is make the desired action obvious.
Make it obvious, not vague like, I should exercise more.
Precisely. Vague goals like read more or eat healthier, they don't actually instruct your brain what to do and when. They leave too much room for debate, for dissonance to creep in. Your brain needs a clear trigger, a cue it can recognize almost automatically.
Like passing the internal argument.
Right. So instead of relying on fuzzy motivation, we use specific techniques. Two really powerful ones are implementation intentions and habit stacking.
Okay, implementation intentions, what's that specifically?
It's simply making a very specific plan beforehand. The formula is, I will perform behavior X at time Y in location Z. So instead of, I'll try to work out tomorrow, it becomes,
When my lunch break starts at 12:30 p.m., time Y, I will put on my running shoes, behavior X, which are by the front door, location Z.
perfect. That level of specificity creates a clear cue and reduces the mental energy needed to decide when and how to act.
And habit stacking. That's linking the new habit to one you already do, right?
Exactly. You anchor the new desired behavior to an existing automatic habit. The structure is, after I current habit, I will new habit.
So if I want to start meditating,
Yeah.
after I finish my first cup of coffee in the morning, current habit, I will sit and meditate for 2 minutes, new habit.
Yes. You're essentially borrowing the momentum and automaticity of the old habit to launch the new one. You're using your existing routines in your environment to make the new behavior the path of least resistance, or at least less resistance. The clearer the link, the less chance the old identity has to talk you out of it.
This feels very practical, very mechanical, and it connects back to some really fundamental principles of learning, doesn't it? Like Pavlov's work.
Absolutely. Pavlov, with his dogs, showed us how associations are formed, but he also noted something relevant here. When you're trying to build a new positive reflex or overcome an established negative one, like an inhibition or a bad habit, you really need to approach it gradually.
In all steps.
Small steps. Trying to force too much change too quickly often leads to what he called disinhibition.
Disinhibition. What happens then?
It's basically when the old ingrained negative habit suddenly bursts back through, seemingly wiping out all the progress you'd made.
The classic relapse that makes you feel like a total failure.
Exactly, but Pavlov would say it's often not a failure of willpower, but a failure of the process. You push too hard against the established conditioning, and the brain snapped back to the easier, more familiar path. Gradual, consistent votes are key.
Okay, so that's the sort of reflexive, associative side.
Yeah.
But what about our more complex, conscious behaviors? Skinner's work seems relevant there.
Very relevant. B.F. Skinner shifted the focus from reflexes to voluntary behaviors. He emphasized that our actions are heavily shaped, often without us realizing it, by the control exerted by the social environment and by the consequences of our actions.
Consequences. So what follows the behavior determines if we do it again.
Right. He talked about contingencies of reinforcement. That's just the relationship between a behavior and what happens immediately after it. If the consequence is rewarding, even in a small way, the behavior is more likely to be repeated. If we want to change behavior long term, we have to understand and then deliberately change those contingencies.
So if my current contingency is I feel stressed, I check social media, I get a tiny dopamine hit of novelty, stress, temporarily forgotten. I need to design a new contingency. Like I feel stressed, I take 3 deep breaths, I feel a tiny bit calmer, and make that the rewarding loop.
That's the idea. But Skinner also noted these contingencies are often subtle, almost invisible in the chaos of everyday life. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what's reinforcing that procrastination habit, for example. Is it avoiding the hard task? Or is it the little reward you get from clicking on a distracting notification?
That is tricky. How do you manage those contingencies in the real world outside a lab?
That's where techniques like habit stacking and controlling your environment come back in. You're trying to consciously design the situation so the desired action leads to some kind of immediate small reward or satisfaction, making it more likely to compete with the old ingrained contingencies. You simplify the environment to make the right contingencies more obvious.
It sounds like a lot of focus on the individual and their immediate environment. But you mentioned social support earlier. Where does that fit in?
It's absolutely critical. This internal battle against dissonance, this effort to establish new contingencies, it's much, much harder to do in isolation. Remember Festinger and cognitive dissonance?
Yeah, the drive for consistency.
Well, he also found that one powerful way we reduce dissonance is by seeking validation from others. Social groups are a huge resource here.
How so?
When you join a group that shares your new desired identity or behavior, maybe it's a running club, a writer's workshop, a support group, you surround yourself with people who confirm your new beliefs and actions.
Ah, so they provide those consonant cognitive elements you mentioned.
Exactly. Your running buddies, talking about their runs, sharing tips, celebrating milestones, all of that reinforces your identity as a runner. It makes the internal consistency easier to achieve because you see external proof that this identity is real and valued. It lowers the psychological discomfort.
You're not fighting your old self alone. You're being pulled into a collective new self.
Beautifully put. And William James nailed this dynamic perfectly ages ago. He said something like, the community stagnates without the individual's new ideas or impulses. But crucially, the impulse dies away without the sympathy of the community. That social feedback, that validation, is the bedrock that allows the fragile new identity to stabilize and withstand the inevitable pushback from the old ways of being.
Okay, we've covered the micro level, the specific votes, making habits obvious, stacking them, getting social support. But let's zoom out. How do we make sure this new identity isn't just skin deep? That it's not just a set of behaviors we're performing, but truly integrated into our, our life's purpose or vision. We need to look at the deeper structure, right?
Absolutely. We need to connect these habits to something bigger. And this brings us to ideas like Alfred Adler's work on finalism and the style of life.
Adler. Okay, finalism. What's the core idea there?
Adler had a really interesting take. He argued against strict determinism, the idea that our biology or our past history directly cause our present behavior.
Which feels intuitive, right? My past made me who I am.
It feels intuitive, but Adler said those things, biology, past experiences, traumas, they don't function as direct causes. Instead, they provide probabilities, they set the stage. But the individual actively uses all those factors, interprets them, in accordance with their unique style of life.
And the style of life is?
It's the individual's characteristic way of moving through the world, and crucially, it's always oriented towards a future goal idea, a vision of who they want to be or what they want to achieve.
So it's not the past pushing us, but the future pulling us. Our interpretation of the past is shaped by where we think we're going.
That's the essence of finalism. Our striving towards a future goal organizes how we experience the present and make choices. And this reframes things like feelings of inferiority.
Which most people see as purely negative.
Right. But Adler saw that feeling of inferiority, that sense of falling short, as potentially a powerful stimulant to healthy, normal striving and development. That feeling, I'm not quite there yet, is what motivates us to learn, to grow, to improve.
Unless it crushes you.
Exactly. It only becomes pathological, he argued, when it overwhelms the person, makes them feel hopeless, and stops them from engaging in socially useful activity. But if your goal idea, your vision for your future identity, is strong and compelling, that feeling of inferiority becomes fuel. It highlights the gap you need to cross, rather than being a reason to give up.
That's a really powerful reframe.
Yeah.
Using the discomfort as motivation toward the identity goal. But getting there, truly integrating that new identity, often means bumping up against some serious internal roadblocks, doesn't it? Like old wounds or conflicting parts of ourselves.
Definitely. And that's where models like internal family systems or IFS, developed by Richard Schwartz, can be incredibly helpful.
IFS. How does that help map the inner world?
IFS suggests that our minds aren't monolithic. They're made up of various parts. Think of them as subpersonalities or inner voices. Each part has its own beliefs, feelings, and roles.
Okay. Like an inner committee.
Kind of. And crucially, many of these parts carry extreme beliefs and emotions because they got locked into certain roles during difficult times in the past, maybe during trauma. They adopted extreme strategies that were necessary for survival then.
And the key insight from IFS is that even the parts that seem destructive now,
like the inner critic or the part that procrastinates or the part that binges, even those parts have protective intentions. They're trying to keep you safe, albeit in outdated or harmful ways.
So the part that makes me procrastinate on a big project might actually be trying to protect me from the potential shame of failing or being judged.
Exactly. It thinks if you don't try, you can't fail. Its intention is protective, even if the outcome is stagnation.
And IFS suggests we shouldn't fight those parts.
Right. Trying to exile or silence them usually just makes them dig in their heels. True identity change needs internal cooperation. Transformation happens when the core self, that innate seat of wisdom, curiosity, and compassion within us, can connect with these parts.
Connect how?
By understanding their protective intention, acknowledging their burden, and inviting them to trust that it's safe now to relax, to step out of those extreme, outdated roles. When these parts feel seen and unburdened, there's more internal space, more energy available for the new identity to emerge and take root. As the sources note, unresolved trauma keeps us stuck, forcing us to repeat what we have done before, blocking creativity and new possibilities.
So healing those inner conflicts is essential for the new identity to feel authentic and integrated.
It really is. It allows the change to come from a place of inner alignment, not just willpower battling against internal resistance.
This whole journey, integrating parts, aligning with a future goal, it sounds fundamentally like a search for meaning, which brings Viktor Frankl to mind.
Absolutely. Frankl's logotherapy, developed through his experiences in concentration camps, emphasized that the search for meaning is the primary driving force for humans. And crucially, he showed that meaning isn't just found in grand achievements.
Where else can we find it?
In our choices, day-to-day activities, relationships, hobbies, creativity, even in simple pleasures. And perhaps most importantly, meaning can be found in the attitude we choose to take when faced with unavoidable suffering or challenges.
So meaning provides the why behind the identity change.
It provides the deep internal architecture. When the votes you're casting align with a genuine sense of purpose, the discomfort of cognitive dissonance becomes more tolerable. You know why you're doing the hard thing. It connects the small habits to the big picture.
And sometimes reaching that deeper level of meaning, that profound identity shift, it requires a kind of breakdown first. I think you were Jung here.
Carl Jung definitely explored that terrain. He suggested that accessing the deepest archetype of meaning, achieving true individuation or wholeness, often requires a shattering of the old structures.
A collapse.
A collapse, yeah. A moment when all our usual props, our ego defenses, our carefully constructed reality just breaks down. It might be a crisis, a loss, a profound failure.
That sounds terrifying.
It is, but Jung saw it as potentially necessary. That collapse forces a surrender of our conscious will, our attachment to the known, limited self. And in that surrender, there's an opening for something deeper, the larger self, to emerge. It's like the old identity has to crumble to make space for the new, more authentic one that's rooted in real meaning. It's the ultimate psychological transformation.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground today, a real deep dive from the tiny mechanics of habits all the way to these profound psychological shifts.
We really have.
We started with that simple but incredibly powerful idea. Lasting change comes from shifting your identity, casting small specific votes with your actions for the person you want to become, the reader, the runner, the healthy person.
Yeah, the focus shifts from outcome to identity.
But we quickly saw it's not that simple because the old identity fights back hard. That internal friction, cognitive dissonance kicks in, making us want to revert to the familiar, even if it's painful. We even saw how we can get trapped in a prison of character, defending our limitations.
And that overcoming that requires smart mechanics, not just brute force. It demands behavioral specificity, making the desired habit obvious, using implementation intentions, stacking habits onto existing cues.
Getting really practical about engineering the behavior.
Exactly, and realizing we don't do it in a vacuum. The social environment is crucial. Finding communities that validate and reinforce the new identity helps tremendously in managing that internal dissonance.
Right, the sympathy of the community keeping the impulse alive.
And then we zoomed out to see that for the change to be truly deep and lasting, it needs to connect to something bigger, to a guiding goal idea like Adler suggested.
Which means we often need to engage with our inner world, understanding and healing the parts of us that resist change out of old fears, like in the IFS model.
Yeah, addressing that internal architecture and ultimately anchoring the whole process in a sense of personal meaning, as Frankl highlighted, gives the new identity stability and purpose.
So the core takeaway, weaving through all of this, seems really clear now. The goal has to be internal. It's about who you are becoming, not just what you were doing.
That's it. The improvements, the changes in behavior, they're ultimately temporary until they become woven into the fabric of who you believe yourself to be. The actions build the belief, and then the belief fuels more action. It becomes a positive cycle.
Okay, let's wrap up with a final thought for everyone listening to mull over.
Sounds good.
We touched on ancient myths, on Jung, on the idea of transformation sometimes requiring a breakdown. Many old stories describe a kind of fall from grace, leaving a comfortable paradise, as being necessary to reach a higher state, a more profound understanding.
The necessary descent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, if the goal truly is to become someone fundamentally new, maybe the provocative question we need to ask ourselves is this: what comfortable illusion about myself, what aspect of my current prison heroism am I willing to let go of, maybe even actively destroy, to make space for the next necessary version of myself to emerge?
That willingness to confront and dismantle the comfortable known self. Perhaps that's where the deepest work of identity change really begins.